Remember when your children looked up to you, valued your wisdom, trusted your guidance? Then something changed. Suddenly, they're dismissing your advice, talking over you, maybe even treating you like you're out of touch or becoming a burden. That reversal doesn't just hurt, it cuts to the very core of your identity. I've spent decades working with seniors just like you who wonder what happened to the respect they once commanded. Here's what I've learned. Arguing, demanding respect, or reminding them of all you've sacrificed won't work. In fact, these approaches often make things worse. But there is a better way, one that doesn't require confrontation or conflict. Today, I'll share 6 powerful strategies that have helped thousands of seniors transform their relationships with adult children and reclaim their rightful place as respected family elders. If this resonates with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's start with the most powerful strategy that changes everything: setting clear boundaries. 1. Set clear boundaries. The most powerful way to regain respect from your adult children starts with something many of us weren't taught in our generation: setting clear, healthy boundaries. When I talk about boundaries, I'm not suggesting building walls between you and your children. I'm talking about defining what respectful treatment looks like and being willing to protect your dignity. I remember meeting Thomas, a 72-year-old retired banking executive who had commanded respect his entire career. Yet at family gatherings, his adult children would interrupt him mid-sentence, dismiss his opinions with eye rolls, or make decisions about his life without consulting him. "I feel invisible in my own family," he confided, his voice heavy with hurt. What changed everything for Thomas wasn't a confrontation or cutting off contact. It was quietly establishing boundaries. When his daughter interrupted him, he gently placed his hand on the table and said, "I'd like to finish my thought first." When his son made a dismissive comment about his political views, Thomas calmly responded, "We might disagree, but I expect to be spoken to respectfully." And when they made plans for his birthday without asking his preference, he simply declined to attend, saying, "I appreciate the thought, but I'd like to be included in planning events that center around me." Now I know what you might be thinking. Won't setting boundaries create conflict? That's what Thomas feared too. But here's what actually happened. After some initial resistance and testing, his children began to notice the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. Their respect returned not because he demanded it, but because he demonstrated that he respected himself. You can begin today with simple phrases like, "I understand we see this differently, but I need to be spoken to respectfully," or "I'm happy to discuss this when you're ready to have a conversation without raising your voice." The key is delivering these messages calmly, without anger or accusation. Remember, respect begins with respecting yourself enough to establish how you deserve to be treated. Have you ever set a boundary with your adult children? Share your experience in the comments. Your wisdom might help another viewer who's struggling. Second stop: pursuing approval. Here's a truth that might surprise you. The more you chase your children's approval, the less respect you'll receive. It seems backward, doesn't it? But I've seen this pattern repeatedly in my work with families. Patricia, a 68-year-old retired teacher from Ohio, described herself as the ultimate people pleaser. She rearranged her schedule whenever her children called. She never expressed opinions that might create tension. She even pretended to enjoy activities she disliked, just to stay in her children's good graces. "I thought I was being a good mother," she told me, "but somehow they started treating me like I was invisible." What Patricia discovered reflects a fundamental truth about human nature. When we constantly accommodate others at our own expense, we unintentionally teach them that our needs, opinions, and boundaries don't matter. Self-sacrifice, when taken too far, doesn't earn respect. It erodes it. This dynamic is particularly challenging for our generation. Many of us were raised to believe that good parents put their children first, always. But in today's America, where adult children often live more independent lives than previous generations, this approach can backfire dramatically. Patricia's transformation began with a simple recognition. Every time she said yes when she wanted to say no, she was betraying herself. She started small, declining a dinner invitation when she was genuinely tired, expressing her preference about holiday plans, voicing her opinion during family discussions, even when it differed from her children's views. The initial response wasn't easy. Her children were surprised, even resistant. "Mom's being difficult," they said. But as Patricia continued respecting her own boundaries, something shifted. Her children began seeking her opinion, valuing her time, and treating her with newfound consideration. The respect returned not because she demanded it, but because she demonstrated through her actions that she respected herself first. Ask yourself, in what areas of your relationship with your children are you abandoning your own needs? Where might you be saying yes when you really want to say no? Your path to regaining respect begins with these honest reflections. 3. Lead through example, not arguments. When your children dismiss your opinions or speak disrespectfully, your first instinct might be to argue back, to remind them of all you've done, to demand the respect you deserve. I understand that impulse. It's human nature. But after decades of working with families, I've discovered something important. You cannot argue someone into respecting you. William, a 75-year-old retired professor from Pennsylvania, learned this the hard way. His adult children had started treating his opinions as outdated, sometimes even mocking his suggestions at family gatherings. "My first reaction was to fight back," William told me. "I'd raise my voice, list my accomplishments, remind them who helped pay for their education. But it only made things worse." The turning point came when William remembered something fundamental about human behavior. We learn more from what people do than what they say. Our brains are wired to respond to modeling more powerfully than to words. Instead of arguing for respect, William began embodying it. When his son interrupted him, William didn't protest. He simply paused, maintained eye contact, and then continued speaking with quiet confidence when the moment passed. When his daughter dismissed his advice, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "You might be right. I've shared my perspective, and I trust you'll consider it." He stopped defending himself and instead carried himself with the dignity of someone who already had respect. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but gradually his children's attitude shifted. They started seeking his counsel, listening more attentively, speaking more respectfully, not because he demanded it, but because his example made it impossible to treat him dismissively. A simple practice you can try today. When you feel disrespected, take a deep breath and ask yourself, how would a person who commands respect respond right now? Then embody that response, measured, dignified, secure in your own worth. Has leading by example ever changed a difficult relationship in your life? I'd love to hear your experiences. 4. Create a fulfilling, independent life. One of the most powerful ways to regain your children's respect has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you. When you build a meaningful, independent life of your own, respect often follows naturally. I'll never forget meeting Sophia, a 70-year-old widow from Florida. After her husband passed, her 3 adult children started treating her like she was fragile, making decisions for her, checking in with that tone that suggested they were doing her a favor. They meant well, Sophia told me, but they didn't see me as a whole person anymore, just as mom who needs help. The change began when Sophia stopped waiting by the phone for her children to call. Instead, she joined a community garden group, started taking watercolor classes at the senior center, and volunteered teaching English to new immigrants. When her daughter called offering to check in on her that weekend, Sophia replied, "I'd love to see you, but I'm only available Sunday afternoon. I have plans the rest of the weekend." The shift in her children's perception was remarkable. They started asking about her projects, respecting her schedule, and treating her as someone with a valuable life of her own, because she was. Today's world offers us opportunities our parents never had. Many seniors are discovering online communities built around shared interests, from gardening forums to virtual book clubs. Others are exploring encore careers, part-time work, or volunteering that uses their lifetime of skills. Some are creating legacy projects, writing memoirs, organizing family photos, or mentoring young people. I understand that health limitations or financial constraints might make some activities challenging, but meaningful engagement can happen at any scale. Whether it's joining a weekly card game at your community center or simply developing a daily creative practice that brings you joy. The question to ask yourself isn't, "What should I do with my time?" but rather, "What matters to me at this stage of my life?" When you pursue what genuinely interests you, your enthusiasm becomes magnetic, and your children will notice. I wonder, what passion or interest have you set aside that might be worth revisiting now? Share your thoughts in the comments. 5. Develop emotional self-reliance. There's a delicate balance in our relationships with adult children, wanting closeness while maintaining dignity. Many seniors cross this line without realizing it, becoming emotionally dependent rather than emotionally connected. Barbara, a 73-year-old grandmother from Michigan, called her daughter daily, sometimes multiple times, often with no specific reason. She measured her happiness by how often her children reached out and fell into deep sadness when days passed without contact. "I just miss them," she explained. "Is it wrong to want to be part of their lives?" What Barbara didn't realize was that her emotional dependence was creating a burden. Her children weren't answering her calls not because they didn't love her, but because each conversation felt like an emotional responsibility they couldn't always handle alongside their own lives. Psychology teaches us something important here. When we make others responsible for our emotional well-being, we create pressure, not connection. And that pressure often leads to withdrawal rather than closeness. Barbara's transformation began when she started building what therapists call emotional resilience, the ability to manage difficult feelings without immediately needing someone else to soothe them. She expanded her social circle through a church group, started journaling when she felt lonely, and established a weekly schedule for family calls rather than reaching out whenever emotions overwhelmed her. The strangest thing happened, Barbara told me 6 months later. When I stopped needing them to call me, they started calling more. When I had other things to talk about besides my loneliness, our conversations became richer. Try this simple practice. Next time you feel the urge to immediately call your child about a concern or feeling, give yourself 1 hour. Sit with the emotion, write about it, or call a friend instead. You might be surprised how often the urgent need passes, and how much more meaningful your conversations become when they're chosen, not needed. What helps you feel emotionally centered when family isn't available? Your insights might help others in our community. 6th, practice discerning generosity. When it comes to giving, whether it's financial help, childcare, or endless accommodation, there's a counterintuitive truth many seniors discover too late. Unlimited generosity often diminishes respect rather than increasing it. Richard, a 69-year-old retired contractor from Arizona, was the family's perpetual safety net. When his son couldn't make rent, Richard paid it. When his daughter needed childcare, he rearranged his schedule. When his children made financial mistakes, he bailed them out, repeatedly. "I thought I was being a good father," Richard explained. "But the more I gave, the less they seemed to appreciate it. Sometimes they even seemed annoyed when I offered help." What Richard was experiencing reflects a fundamental principle of human psychology. What comes without effort or consequence is rarely valued. His unlimited giving wasn't teaching generosity. It was fostering entitlement. Today's economic realities make this dynamic particularly challenging. Many adult children face financial pressures our generation didn't experience at their age. The desire to help is natural and admirable. But as Richard discovered, there's a profound difference between supportive giving and enabling. His breakthrough came when he started practicing what I call discerning generosity, giving with intention rather than obligation. When his son asked for rent money again, Richard replied, "I care about you deeply, but continuing to cover your financial shortfalls isn't helping either of us. I'm happy to help you create a budget instead." When his daughter requested last-minute childcare, he said, "I can watch the kids next Tuesday if you let me know by Sunday, but not with just 2 hours' notice." The initial response was resistance, even anger. But over time, something remarkable happened. His children started planning better, asking less, and most surprisingly, respecting him more. Ask yourself, where might your generosity be creating dependency rather than gratitude? When do you give from love, and when from guilt or habit? The answers might transform your family dynamics. Have you ever had to set limits on your giving? How did your family respond? Remember, respect isn't something you can demand with words. It's something you inspire through your actions. Each strategy we've discussed begins with the same foundation: honoring yourself first. Your children will reflect back the value you place on your own dignity, wisdom, and boundaries. Be patient with this process. Family dynamics don't transform overnight, and there may be resistance initially. But I've witnessed countless seniors reclaim their rightful place as respected elders by applying these principles consistently. You've spent a lifetime developing wisdom. Now it's time to apply that wisdom to perhaps your most important relationship, the one with yourself. When you stand firmly in your own worth, others have no choice but to notice. What step will you take today to reclaim the respect you deserve? Your journey begins now.